Lisa screamed as her mother Janet pinned her down. The girl's wide, terrified eyes reflected the sharp blade glinting in the dim candlelight. "You think you're better than me?" Janet hissed, her voice thick with resentment. Lisa struggled, but her mother's grip was strong, fueled by years of buried jealousy. The moment the cold blade touched her cheek, Lisa's world shattered. A burning pain tore through her skin as her mother carved a deep, ugly scar across her once perfect face. Lisa's cries echoed through the small house, but no one came to save her. Blood dripped onto the wooden floor, mixing with Lisa's tears. She could hardly believe this was happening. This was her mother, the woman who was supposed to love and protect her. "Now let's see if they still call you beautiful," her mother sneered, throwing the knife aside. Lisa clutched her face, feeling the warm liquid seep between her fingers. The pain was unbearable, but the betrayal hurt even more. She tried to meet her mother's gaze, hoping to see some regret, but all she found was satisfaction. Her mother stood up and walked away as if nothing had happened. Lisa lay on the floor, trembling. Her whole life, people had admired her beauty. Strangers in the market would stop to admire her. Teachers in school always smiled at her. Boys sent her gifts, and even women complimented her flawless skin. But her mother had always looked at her with heat red. Lisa had thought it was just strictness, but now she knew. It was jealousy, and that jealousy had turned into something monstrous. The girl clutched her bleeding face and sobbed, realizing her own mother had destroyed her face because she was more beautiful than her. Lisa had always been the center of attention. Ever since she was a child, people stopped to admire her. "What a beautiful girl," they would say, their faces lighting up with awe. At school, teachers often called her the prettiest girl in the school. Other girls envied her, but they never showed hatred. They just wished they could look like her. Boys followed her around, hoping for a chance to talk to her. Even at church, women talked about how lucky her mother was to have such a beautiful daughter. But Janet, her mother, was never looked happy when people praised Lisa. As Lisa grew older, she noticed how her mother's behavior changed. Janet no longer complimented her. Instead, she ignored her or looked at her with a strong hatred, one that Lisa didn't understand at first. Her mother started making rude remarks about Lisa's appearance. "Beauty fades," she would say sharply. "You better focus on your studies because looks won't take you anywhere." But Lisa knew her mother's words were not advice. They were warnings, filled with bitterness. She couldn't understand why her mother hated hearing others admire her. Then came the punishments. If Lisa received a compliment at the market, her mother would slap her at home for no reason. When Lisa turned 15, her mother stopped buying her new clothes and told her to wear oversized old dresses. "You don't need to look fancy," Janet said coldly. But Lisa was naturally beautiful. No matter what she wore, people still noticed her, and that only made her mother's hatred worse. The next morning, Lisa sat in front of the mirror, afraid to look. She slowly removed the bandage from her face. As the white cloth fell away, she gasped. A deep, jagged scar ran across her cheek from her forehead to her chin. Her smooth, perfect skin was ruined forever. She touched it gently, wincing at the pain. This was no accident. It was her mother's doing, deliberate, cruel, and unforgivable. Tears filled her eyes as she thought about her past. She remembered how the market women used to say, "Your daughter will be a queen one day." The teachers who told her, "With a face like that, you could be a model." But now, who would call her beautiful? Would people still look at her the same way? She had never felt so broken before. She had lost more than just her looks. She had lost her confidence and her sense of self-worth. Her mother entered the room, a smile on look on her face. "Get dressed," she ordered. "You have school." Lisa turned to face her, expecting some guilt, some regret, but there was none. "Why did you do this to me?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Her mother laughed. "Now, you're just like me," she said. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. For the first time in her life, she truly saw her mother, not as a parent, but as a monster. Lisa walked to school with her head down, her heart pounding in her chest. She could already hear the whispers before she even stepped into the classroom. The moment she entered, the chatter stopped, replaced by shocked gasps. Every pair of eyes locked onto her face. The beautiful Lisa was no more. The scar was the first thing they noticed, angry, red, and impossible to ignore. Girls exchanged glances, some whispering behind. Boys who used to follow her with admiration now looked at her with pity or disgust. Everyone wondered what happened to her face. Lisa felt like she couldn't breathe. Even the teacher hesitated before speaking. "Lisa, take a seat," she said. Lisa's hands trembled as she pulled out her chair. The moment she sat, someone said, "What happened to her face?" a voice murmured. "She looks like a horror movie character," another whispered. Lisa's throat tightened, but she refused to cry. If she cried, they would only talk more. She clenched her fists under the desk, staring straight ahead, trying to pretend she didn't hear them. At lunch, she sat alone. Her best friend Anna, who had always stood by her side, hesitated before approaching. "Lisa," she started, but she didn't finish. She kept looking at the scare, but Anna looked away. I'll see you later," she mumbled before hurrying off. Lisa swallowed the lump in her throat. She had never felt so alone in her life. Lisa returned home in silence, her feet dragging. The moment she stepped inside, her mother was already waiting. "How was school?" she asked. Lisa said nothing. She just walked past her mother and into her room. But Janet wasn't done. She followed her inside and leaned against the doorframe. "Did they laugh at you?" she asked, her lips curling in amusement. Lisa clenched her jaw, refusing to answer. She would not give her mother the satisfaction. "You should be grateful," her mother continued. "Now, you don't have to worry about people only loving you for your face. Now, they'll see the real you." Lisa's nails dug into her palms. "You did this to me," she said through gritted teeth. "You ruined my face." Her mother scoffed. "Life isn't about being pretty," she said coldly. "I did you a favor. Now you can focus on things that actually matters." Lisa turned sharply to face her. "You did this because you were jealous," she shot back. Her mother's face darkened. For the first time, her mother didn't have a quick response. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a brief second, Lisa saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But then it was gone. "Go to bed," her mother snapped before storming out of the room. Lisa sat on her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She could not stay in this house forever. One day she would leave, and she would make sure her mother regretted everything she had done. Lisa forced herself to stop caring about the stares and whispers. If her mother wanted to destroy her, she wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing her broken. She started focusing on her studies more than ever, determined to succeed despite everything. She ignored the classmates who laughed at her and paid attention only to her books, but deep inside, the pain remained. Every time she looked in the mirror, she had to remind herself that she was more than just a face. One day, during a school assembly, the principal made an announcement. "We will be hosting a speech competition," she said. "The winner will represent the school at the state level." Lisa's heart pounded. She had never thought of speaking in public, but something inside her stirred. Maybe this was her chance, to prove that she was still someone, that she was still important. Before she could change her mind, she stepped forward. "I want to participate," she said. Gasps filled the room. Even the principal raised an eyebrow. "Lisa?" she asked, surprised. Lisa nodded firmly. The students whispered amongst themselves. "She thinks she can stand in front of everyone with that face?" someone muttered. Lisa heard them, but this time she didn't flinch. She met their stares head on. "I'll do it," she repeated. And for the first time in weeks, she felt like she had power over her own life again. Lisa spent every night preparing for the competition. She practiced in front of the mirror, ignoring the scar and focusing only on her voice. If she couldn't be admired for her beauty anymore, she would make them admire something else. Her intelligence, her words, her strength. She read books, watched videos of great speakers, and stood in front of her classmates to rehearse. Some mocked her, but she refused to stop. The day of the competition arrived. As Lisa stepped onto the stage, she felt the weight of 100 eyes on her, but she didn't let it shake her. She took a deep breath and began speaking. Her voice was steady, her words powerful. She spoke about courage, about finding strength even when the world tries to break you. She spoke about pain, about learning to rise above it. By the time she finished, the entire hall was silent. Then, slowly, applause erupted. Lisa scanned the crowd and saw something she had never expected: respect. Even those who had laughed at her before now looked at her differently. She had taken their pity and turned it into something else. She had proven that she was more than just a pretty face. And as she stepped down from the stage, she felt something new, a sense of victory. When Lisa got home that day, her mother was sitting in the living room watching TV. She barely glanced up when Lisa walked in. But then, something made her pause. There was something different about her daughter, not just in the way she stood, but in her eyes. There was no more fear, no more sadness. Lisa looked happy. "I won the competition," Lisa said simply. Her mother blinked. "What?" she asked, as if she hadn't heard right. "I won," Lisa repeated. Janet stared at her, but for once she had nothing to say. Lisa didn't wait for a response. She walked past her mother, feeling lighter than she had in months. She didn't need her approval anymore. She had found something better: her own self-worth. For the first time, her mother felt something strange deep in her chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was something else. Something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Was it regret? She looked at her reflection in the dark TV screen. For the first time, she saw herself clearly, the bitterness, the hatred, and she realized that in trying to destroy her daughter, she had only revealed the ugliness in herself. Lisa sat in her room, staring at the golden trophy in her hands. It was more than just an award. It was proof that she was still worth something. She no longer needed people to admire her beauty to feel important. She had found her voice, and no one could take that away from her. For the first time in weeks, she felt peace settling in her heart. She no longer feared her mother's cold glares or cruel words. The next morning, when she walked into school, something surprising happened. People greeted her differently. They no longer whispered cruel things about her face. Instead, they talked about her speech. "You were amazing," Anna told her, smiling. "I wish I could be as brave as you." Lisa smiled back, feeling warmth in her chest. She had spent so much time believing she was ruined, but now she realized that she was stronger than she had ever been before. Even the boys who used to follow her for her looks now respected her for something more. It felt strange, but also right. Beauty fades, but strength lasts forever. Lisa walked through the school hallways with her head high. She had found something her mother had never understood: true confidence. And no matter what happened next, she knew she would never let anyone take that away from her again. Her mother sat alone in the kitchen, staring at her hands. She had spent years hating Lisa for being everything she wasn't: young, admired, beautiful. And yet, even after she had scarred her, Lisa had risen above it. She had turned her pain into strength. Janet felt something she hadn't felt in years: shame. But it was too late to take back what she had done. The damage was already done, and she knew her daughter would never look at her the same way again. That evening, Lisa came home to find her mother sitting in the dark. "Why are you sitting here alone?" she asked cautiously. Janet looked up, and for the first time, her eyes were not filled with resentment. They were filled with sadness. "Do you hate me?" her mother asked softly. Lisa was silent for a long time. She had spent so many nights crying over what her mother had done. She had dreamed of running away, of never seeing her again. But as she looked at the woman before her, she realized something. Her mother was just as broken as she had tried to make Lisa. "I don't hate you," Lisa finally said, "but I don't understand why you hate me." Her mother let out a shaky breath. She wanted to say something, to explain, but no words came. How could she explain years of jealousy? How could she admit that she had hurt her own daughter because of her own self-hatred? Instead, she just lowered her head, her body trembling. Lisa didn't know if she would ever forgive her, but for the first time she saw her mother not as a monster, but as a deeply flawed human being. Weeks passed, and Lisa focused on her future. She continued to excel in school, and people no longer looked at her scar as something ugly. Instead, they saw it as a symbol of strength. She started helping other students who struggled with self-confidence, sharing her story openly. She wanted others to know that scars, whether on the outside or inside, did not define who they were. One day, her mother walked into Lisa's room, holding an envelope. "This came for you," she said quietly. Lisa took it and opened it cautiously. Her eyes widened when she saw the words written inside. It was a scholarship offer from a university. "You got in," Janet said, her voice unreadable. Lisa looked up at her mother, searching for any sign of jealousy. But for once there was none. There was only something that looked like pride. Lisa smiled faintly. "I'm leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. Janet nodded slowly. "I know," she said. She didn't try to stop her, and Lisa didn't expect her to. For the first time, they both understood something important. Lisa was no longer the little girl who needed her mother's approval. She had grown beyond that. She had learned to survive without it. The day Lisa left for university, she stood outside the house, looking at the place she had spent her whole life. This was the house where she had laughed, cried, and been broken. But it was also the place where she had learned to rebuild herself. She turned to see her mother standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "Take care of yourself," Janet said stiffly. It wasn't an apology, but Lisa knew it was the closest thing to one she would ever get. "I will," Lisa said. She hesitated for a moment before adding, "And you should too." Then, without another word, she walked away, leaving behind the pain, the anger, and the past. She was ready for something new. As she stepped into the bus, she looked out the window one last time. She saw her mother still standing there, watching her go. Lisa thought she saw something different in her mother's eyes. Maybe it was regret, maybe it was love, or maybe it was just the realization that, in the end, Lisa had become everything Janet had never been: strong, unbreakable, and free. Lisa took a deep breath as the bus pulled away. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: she would never let anyone define her again. Her beauty had been stolen, but her spirit remained, and that, she realized, was the most powerful thing of all. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.